High Marshal Vesik Duran had signed the order before his second cup of stimulant had cooled, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to remember whether his hand had paused at all. It had not. The order was routine. That was the word in the margins stamped by the logistics office in the small, clean glyphs of the Sovereign Concorde. Routine clearance, a single orbital station above a nothing world, at the edge of a nothing system flagged for removal because a supply lane needed the room, and the station sat in the way. Halden's Reach. Doran had to check the name against the manifest because he had never heard it and would never need to. Again, on the deck of his flagship, the lights were low and the air was cold, the way he liked it, and 43 species of officer moved through their tasks without a sound. Doran stood at the rail, above the tactical well, and watched the little station turn on the display, a slow gray ring against a brown planet, and he felt nothing at all. This was the part of conquest. No one sang about not the battle, the paperwork, the quiet mornings when a marshal cleared a lane and drank his stimulant, and a place that had taken 40 years to build simply stopped being on the map. Confirm the removal, he said. Confirmed, High Marshal. The station reads civilian, agricultural registry, roughly 400 souls aboard. Take them into holding, erase the rest. Down on that gray ring, though the marshal could not have known it and would not have cared, an old man named Elias Vance was watering a row of seedlings by hand. Elias was 61 years old. He had a stiff left knee and a habit of talking to plants that his daughter had teased him about for 30 years, right up until the week she left for a posting 2 systems away and made him promise on the dock to eat something green. Now and then, he had built the seed vault himself. Not the station. The station was old, but the vault inside it. The long, cold room where he kept the labeled jars, every jar written in his own hand because he did not trust a machine to spell the names right. Wheat that could grow in thin soil. A tomato his grandmother had carried off Earth in a coat pocket. He was checking the humidity on the 3rd row when the lights flickered and then held, and he told the seedlings it was nothing, just the old station clearing its throat, and he kept watering. Doran turned away from the display before the removal finished. He always did. Not squeamishness. Efficiency. There was a high table session in 9 minutes, and the marshal did not like to be the last voice in the room. The high table met in a chamber built to make 43 species feel small, and it worked on all of them except the ones who had built it. Duran took his place beneath the great slow rotation of the Concorde's holdings 10,000 worlds, turning gold above their heads, and he listened to the speaker, read the day's clearances in a voice like water over stone. And the human colony matter, the speaker said near the end, the way one mentions a stain on a sleeve. The petition for recognition, denied, again I trust, a ripple of something that was almost amusement went around the table. The humans had petitioned 4 times. 4 times they had come to the Concorde's edge, with their one blue world and their single system, and asked to be seen to sit at the table to be spoken to as equals. And 4 times the table had said what it said now in the words. It always used the words that had become a small comfort passed from session to session, like a warm cup. One world is a leash, the speaker said, and the table murmured it back, pleased. One world is a leash. A species with a single planet could be reached, reasoned with, or, if it came to that, held by the throat, because it had only one throat. The humans had one world, therefore, the humans were a leash. The Concorde had simply not yet chosen to pull. It was very tidy. Doran had said it himself more than once, and had never once felt the need to wonder if it was true. 200 light years away in a room, the Concorde did not know existed. A woman was reading the same denial off a plain screen and not reacting to it at all. Fleet Admiral Nadia Cole had a face built for bad news. Flat, unhurried, the kind of calm that made junior officers check their own posture. She read the Concorde's refusal twice, set the screen down, and said nothing about it. What she said to the officer beside her was about something else entirely. What did the yard clear this week? The officer checked. 40, Admiral. Off the one line. 40. Cole nodded once, as if that were a weather report. Good week. She did not explain the number. She did not need to, not to anyone in that room. and she certainly was not saying it for the Concorde's benefit, because the Concorde was not listening and would not have understood the number if it had. 40 was not a fleet. 40 was a Tuesday. 40 hulls off a single line, 1 week, 1 yard, and the line did not stop when the week ended. It never stopped. That was the part the Concorde had no word for. And a species that does not have a word for a thing has a hard time seeing it coming. Cole picked the screen back up. They took a station, she said. The officer went still. Which one? Halden's Reach. Agricultural. 400 aboard. She was quiet for a moment. One of them is a man named Vance. He ran the seed vault. His daughter's on the Meridian's roster. Second engineering. The officer did not say anything. There was nothing to say yet. That was how it worked in that room. You logged the name, and you waited. And the waiting was its own kind of promise. Bring me the Meridian's readiness, Cole said, and find out where the marshal who signed that order sleeps. Back on the flagship, the removal was done. Doran received the report the way he received all of them, standing half listening, already reading the next station cleared. 400 in holding, to be processed as labor or leverage depending on how the humans behaved. When they noticed, structure erased. No resistance, no losses. A clean morning's work, at the edge of a large and comfortable empire. He almost put the report down. What stopped him was a single line at the bottom, flagged by an analyst too junior to know when to leave a thing alone. During the removal, the station's outermost sensor buoy had logged a contact, one vessel, human profile, that had not been there before and was not there after. It had not fired. It had not hailed. It had simply been present at the edge of the buoy's range for the length of the removal, and then it had left. Watching. Doran read the line twice. It was nothing. A scout, a salvage crawler, a courier passing through. The Concorde's records held every class of human ship worth naming, and none of them mattered, because the humans had one world, and one world was a leash. Still, he found he did not like the shape of it. He did not like that it had come to watch, and had not come to help. He did not like that it had left without a word, because in Doran's long experience the things that screamed were rarely the things you had to fear. It was the quiet ones, the ones that arrived and looked, and made a note, and went home. Increased patrol density on the lane, he said, and told himself it was thoroughness and not unease. The officer logged the order. Increase patrol density. Routine. Doran went back to his stimulant. It had gone cold while he was at the table, and he drank it anyway. And above him, 10,000 worlds turned gold and slow, and none of them were blue. And he did not think about the small one. That was not that morning. Not while there was still a morning in which not thinking about it cost him nothing. 200 light years away, a yard cleared its 41st hull of the week, and a woman with a flat, calm face wrote down an old man's name, so that she would not have to remember it, because she was not going to forget it. The first thing to go wrong was so small that no one reported it for 2 days. A picket ship called the Ninth Vale, assigned to the newly thickened patrol lane, missed a scheduled check-in. This happened. Ships drifted out of alignment relays, lagged young officers, forgot the window. The duty station logged it and waited for the next window. And when the next window came and went in silence, the officer on watch felt the first cold thread of something he could not name, and he escalated it. And that was how the report reached Vesik Doran's desk, with a single word attached that Doran had not seen in a very long time. Lost. Not destroyed. Not overdue. Lost. The Ninth Vale had been in a monitored lane inside Concord space, surrounded by the Concord's own eyes, and it had simply stopped being anywhere. No debris, no distress call, no final transmission clipped short in the way that told you a ship had died, screaming. There was the ship on the record, and then there was not the ship, and between those two states there was nothing at all. Doran pulled the lane's sensor history himself. He did not delegate it. He sat in the low, cold light of his ready room and walked the data back minute by minute, and what he found made him sit very still. At the moment the Ninth Vale went quiet, the buoys along the lane had logged a contact, human profile, the same signature the outer buoy had caught watching the removal at Halden's Reach. It had crossed the lane unhurried, and it had not fired, because there was no weapons discharge on the record, no energy bloom, no exchange. It had simply passed through the space the ninth veil occupied, and after it passed, the ninth veil was not there. He ran the human profile against the fleet registry. The registry was thorough. It was the Concorde's pride, 43 species worth of accumulated knowledge. Every hull class of every power the Empire had ever met, cross-referenced and catalogued and kept current by a division that took its work as a sacred trust. The registry returned nothing, not an old match, not a probable nothing. The profile of the ship that had crossed the lane, where a Concorde picket died, did not exist in the Concorde's records, and the records did not have a category for that. A thing the records did not know was by the logic the Empire had been built on a thing that was not important. The registry held everything that mattered. Therefore, this did not matter. Duran stared at the empty return for a long time. "It's not in our records," he said aloud, to no one testing the words to see if they were as strange said as they had felt read. They were stranger. 200 light-years away, the ship that was not in anyone's records had a name, though the humans rarely bothered to say it, and the name was the Meridian, and she was not a warship. That was the part the Concorde would take longest to understand. The Meridian was a working vessel, a patrol hull, the kind of ordinary ship a species builds 40 of in a week and does not think about again. Aboard her in second engineering, a young woman named Vance ran a diagnostic on a coolant line and did not know yet that her father's name was written on Admiral Cole's desk 200 light-years back, and Cole intended to keep it that way until there was something to tell her that would not simply break her at her post. The Meridian had crossed the lane because Cole had asked her to. "Look," Cole had said, "don't touch. Let them see you, and let them wonder." The ninth veil had not been the mission. The ninth veil had made the mistake of turning to intercept a ship. It did not recognize in a manner the Meridian's captain judged hostile, and the Meridian had done the smallest possible thing about it, and then continued on her way. To the humans, it was a footnote in a patrol log. To the Concorde, it was the beginning of a silence that would swallow an empire, and neither side yet understood how differently they were counting. The Concorde sent a proper force to the lane, not a fleet. The table would not waste a fleet on a picket loss, but a formation. 6 ships under a competent subcommander, with orders to find the human vessel, identify it, and if it proved hostile, remove it. Routine escalation. Doran signed it. His hand did not pause this time either, but he noticed the not pausing, and he did not like that he noticed. The formation found the Meridian without much trouble. She was not hiding. She sat at the edge of the lane, one ship, running lights. On the way a person stands in an open doorway. The sub-commander hailed her, and to everyone's surprise, the human answered, and to everyone's greater surprise, the human was calm. The record of that exchange would later be studied by every war college the Concorde had left. At the time it seemed like nothing. Unidentified vessel. The sub-commander said, "You are in sovereign Concorde space. Identify your class and intent." Admiral Nadia. Cole. Human patrol vessel Meridian. The voice was flat, an unbothered a voice, reading a list. "We're aware of where we are. We came to talk about Halden's Reach." Halden's Reach was a lawful clearance. 400 people, Cole said. "One of them grew things. We'd like them back." The sub-commander, who had 6 ships and the confidence of a species that had never once needed to fear a single vessel, made the choice that his whole civilization would have made in his place. He decided to demonstrate, not to destroy the humans, might have value as leverage, but to show this one calm ship what it was speaking to. He brought his formation into a posture the Concorde used to make smaller powers reconsider 6 hulls bristling weapons, live a wall of readiness that had ended 100 negotiations before they began. The Meridian did not move. Cole did not raise her voice. She did not warm it or cool it, she said. You don't want to do that, in exactly the tone she had used to say the rest. And the sub-commander felt for the first time in his career the specific discomfort of not being able to tell whether he was being threatened or warned. Because with the humans he would learn those were not the same thing. And the difference was the whole story. He held the posture for a 3-count, pride mostly. Then he stood it down and told himself it was because leverage had value, and filed a report that said the human vessel had declined to engage, which was true, and left out that he had declined first, which was also true. On the flagship, Doran read that report and understood the thing under it. The way you understand a floorboard is rotten by the sound and not the sight. His sub-commander had brought 6 ships to bear on one, and the one had not blinked, and the 6 had stood down. The humans had done nothing. That was what frightened him. A power that fires when threatened is a power you can measure. A power that simply looks at your drawn weapon and waits is telling you it has already done the arithmetic and does not find your 6 ships worth the trouble of a reply. He convened the high table. He laid it out plainly because he was not a fool and did not survive by flattering himself. A lost picket, a ship not in the records, a formation face down without a shot, and underneath it, the number that had begun to bother him, the number he could not source but could not stop turning over, because somewhere in the intercepted human chatter, his analysts had caught a fragment, an officer mentioning offhand what a yard had cleared that week, and the fragment said 40, what the speaker asked. They didn't say Doran admitted, ships, I believe, off one line. In 1 week, the table considered this, and decided, as the table always decided, in favor of comfort. 40 ships in a week was absurd. No power built like that. The humans were posturing, inflating, doing what small powers did when they wanted to be feared. They had one world. A world could be reached. A world could, if it came to it, be held. One world is a leash, the speaker said, and the table said it back. But Doran, listening, heard something he had not heard in the phrase before. He heard how much they needed it to be true, and a thing you need to be true, he thought and did not say, is not the same as a thing that is. That night he did what he had told his sub-commander not to bother with. He asked the registry formally for a full accounting of human industrial capacity. The registry returned a figure so low he almost laughed. Then he saw the date on the figure. It was from the humans' first petition. 4 petitions ago. The Concord had looked at the humans once long enough to decide they did not matter, and had never looked again, and had been quietly filing that first glance as current fact for years. Doran sat in the cold dark and asked himself, for the first time, a question that no one at the table would have permitted in daylight. How many ships do they have? He sent the question through channels phrased as a demand to the one human who had answered so far. The reply came back within the hour. It was 1 line, and it was calm, and it did not answer him at all. More than you'd like. Nadia Cole had written, fewer than we'll need to build, if you make us. The Concord decided to stop asking. It was not a decision made in a single room, and no one who made it would later admit to having made it. But that is how empires move. 100 small certainties, each reasonable on its own, add up in the dark until the empire is already walking toward the cliff and calling it a road. The humans had lost the Concord a picket and faced down a formation and answered a high marshal's demand with a line that read like insolence. The remedy to a power that had never in living memory needed a second remedy was force, not a demonstration this time. A real one. The table authorized a battle group, 40 ships under a senior commander with orders that no longer used the word remove as a euphemism. Doran signed it. He signed it because the alternative was to stand before the table and argue that the empire should be afraid of one working vessel and a number it could not confirm, and a marshal who said that out loud would not be a marshal by the next session. So he signed, and he told himself that 40 Concord ships settling the matter would prove the humans were exactly what the registry said they were, and that he would sleep better once they had. He did not sleep better. The battle group made its crossing and arrived at the coordinates where the meridian had last been seen, and the meridian was there, and she was not alone. Not a fleet. Hull would never have shown them a fleet, because a fleet was a number you could write down and get used to. What waited alongside the meridian was worse than a fleet. It was ordinary ships, a double handful of them, the same working hulls running lights on, arranged with no particular menace, the way a townspeople gather on a porch to watch something coming up the road. They were not arrayed for battle. They were simply present and unafraid. And that was the message. And the senior commander missed it entirely. He opened with an ultimatum. And when Cole answered it the way she answered everything, he opened fire. The record of what followed took the Concorde's analysts a long time to accept, not because it was complex, but because it was so plain. The Concorde battle group fired. First, fired. Hard. Fired. With the full weight of a power that had ended dozens of upstarts this way. And the humans did not die. They did not have a shield the Concorde had never seen. They did not unveil a weapon that unwrote physics. What they had was worse. In a way, the Concorde had no framework to grasp. They had ships that were built to take a hit and keep working crews that had trained for exactly this and were not surprised by any of it. And behind them, unseen, the thing that actually mattered. When a human hull was crippled, it fell back, and another slid forward to take its place. And the crippled one was already being logged for a yard that would have it back in the line before the Concorde could resupply. The humans were not winning the battle. They were absorbing it. And a thing that absorbs everything you have and asks flatly whether you have more is not an enemy. You are fighting. It is a wall you are running at. Halfway through, the senior commander understood he was not going to break them, and he did the sensible thing, the thing his training demanded, and he tried to disengage. Cole let him. That was the second message, and he missed that one too. She let the survivors pull back, and she did not pursue, and she did not gloat. And to a species that read mercy as weakness, being allowed to run looked like a gift and felt like nothing, when it should have felt like a hand, deciding for reasons of its own not to close. Doran read the after-action report standing up as he read everything, and he had to set it down and sit, which he never did. 40 ships, 22, returned, and in the returned ships' logs, the same detail again and again. In the words of frightened officers, who did not know they were all describing the same thing. The humans had not fought like a power defending its one world. They had fought like a power that had done this before and expected to do it again, and had already priced it in. There was no panic in them. There was no fear. There was a kind of terrible patience. And one line captured by a survivors.com before the human channel closed that Doran would carry for the rest of his life. A human voice, unhurried to another human, not even addressed to the Concorde, caught by accident on an open band. That's 206 off the North Yard this month. Tell them to slow down. We're running out of names. 206. Doran did the arithmetic. He had been refusing to do 40 ships in a week had seemed a lie. 206 in a month. Off one yard. The North Yard, which implied other yards, which implied a way of making war that the Concorde had no counter to, because it was not a way of making war at all. It was a way of making. The humans were not spending a fleet to fight the Concorde. They were running a line, and the line did not care about the outcome of any single battle. And you cannot deter a line by winning a battle because the line was never the thing you were fighting. He convened the table, and this time he did not soften it. They have more than we can count, he said. Because they do not keep a fleet the way we keep a fleet. They keep a yard. We are not facing an enemy. We are facing an output. The table did not want to hear it. The table had said one world is a leash for so long that the words had stopped being an argument and become a wall. And Doran was asking them to walk through the wall. The speaker rose and said the phrase again. And this time it did not comfort. This time, in the great chamber under the 10,000 gold worlds, the words hung in the cold air and sounded to at least one marshal exactly like a man in the dark, whistling to convince himself he is not afraid. One world, the speaker said, is a leash, then pull it, Doran said, quietly. And the chamber went very still, because no one said that. Pull it, and see what's on the other end. They did not pull it. Instead, they did what frightened powers do when the truth is too large. They doubled the stakes to make the fear go away. If 40 ships could not settle the humans, and if the humans would not be reasoned with, then the Concorde would end the conversation. The oldest way there was. It would threaten the leash directly. It would move on the one blue world, and here the humans who had been patient through the loss of Halden's reach, patient through the demonstration, and the battle group patient, in a way that the Concorde had catastrophically mistaken for weakness, stopped being patient. The change came through a single transmission sent openly on every band in the clear, so that all 43 species of the Concorde received it at once, and none could pretend they had not. It was cold. It was still calm, but there was something underneath the calm. Now something the Concorde had never heard from the humans because the Concorde had never earned it. "You've clarified your intentions," Cole said. "So I'll clarify ours. Until now you've been dealing with a patrol. That's over. You wanted to know how many ships we have. You're about to stop asking that question, because it was never the right one." A pause. Not for effect. For wait. "We built something a long time ago that we hoped we'd never introduce you to. We named it so we'd remember what it was for. It's called the Long Answer, and it's already moving. And I want you to understand that we are not sending it to end you. We're sending it so we never have to have this conversation again." The transmission closed. On the flagship, Vesic Doran stood in the cold dark and felt the specific vertigo of a man who has finally, far too late, begun to count correctly. He thought of the number, 40 then, 206 each figure, not a boast but a byproduct, mentioned in passing the way you mention the weather. And he understood at last that the humans had never once been trying to frighten him with the number. They had simply been telling the truth, and the truth had kept getting larger, and he had kept filing it as a lie, because the truth did not fit in the records. He did not know what the long answer was. He knew with a certainty that settled in him like cold water that he had signed the order that summoned it on a quiet morning over a cup of stimulant without pausing his hand, and that somewhere aboard a working ship a young engineer named Vance still did not know her father was gone, and that the humans knew and had written it down and were coming. "Increase patrol density," someone said on the deck behind him, logging a routine order into a silence that no amount of patrols would ever fill. Doran almost laughed. It came out as nothing at all. They saw it before they understood it, and understanding it took longer than seeing it, which was the first mercy the humans gave them. Though no one aboard the conquered fleet would have called it that, the long answer came out of the dark the way a coastline comes out of fog, not fast. That was the thing that broke the nerve of the officers. Watching the officers who had braced for a lunge and got instead a slow, absolute arrival. It did not race toward them. It simply grew, resolving, out of the black, at the far edge of the system, and the longer they watched, the more of it there was, until the sensor crews stopped reporting its dimensions, because the dimensions had stopped meaning anything. A crew could say out loud. Doran had ordered the fleet into a defensive sphere, the tightest formation the Conquered knew, hundreds of hulls layered around the flagship in the posture that had survived every threat the Empire had ever met. He stood at the rail above the tactical well and watched his defensive sphere, his hundreds of ships, his 43 species of trained and disciplined crew. And then he watched the thing coming toward them, and for the first time in his life, the Marshal understood the true size of a mistake by looking at the shape of what was arriving to correct it. It was not a ship the way his ships were ships. It was closer to a decision made physical. There was a discipline to it, a plainness, no ornament anywhere, on the vast dark length of it, because the humans had not built it to be looked at. They had built it to be sufficient. Every line of it said the same thing, and the thing it said was not a threat. Threats are loud. This was quiet, the way the deepest water is quiet, and Doran realized he was looking at something that had been made by people who had thought very carefully, a long time ago, about exactly this moment, and had decided to be ready for it, had then hoped with everything in them that it would never come. He knew that somehow, before anyone told him, the name told him. The humans did not name their weapons after fear. They had named this one the Long Answer. And standing there watching it fill his sky, Doran finally understood the name was not a boast. It was a confession. It was the humans admitting that somewhere in their history they had learned that a short answer was not enough, that they had tried short answers and buried the people those answers had cost, and that they had built this so that they would only ever have to answer once. On the human side in a room, the Conquered still could not find. Nadia Cole watched the same approach on a plain screen and did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. This was the part of the job she had spent her whole life hoping to hand to someone else, and never had. Beside her second engineering A young woman named Vance stood at her station and watched the long answer move past the meridian, and did not know that the reason her admiral's face was flatter than usual, harder than usual, was standing 8 rows in front of her and had her father's chin. Signal from the Concord flagship, an officer said. They're hailing. Priority. It's the Marshal himself. Cole considered it. On the screen, the great dark shape of the long answer settled into position above the Concord's defensive sphere, unhurried, taking the high ground, the way a patient man takes a chair. And every weapon in the Concorde fleet came live at once, hundreds of them, a wall of readiness that had ended 100 negotiations. He wants to talk now, Cole said. Not a question. Now that it's over his head. Do you want to answer? Not yet. She watched the Concorde's weapons burn hot on the display, hundreds of hulls bristling the Empire, drawing every blade it had. Let him hold that up a moment. Let him see what it buys him. Aboard the flagship, Duran held it up. He had brought his whole fleet to bear the largest concentration of force the Concorde had assembled in a generation, and he stood beneath the slow gold rotation of 10,000 worlds and pointed all of it at a single human ship. And he waited for the fear to make him feel strong, the way it always had. It did not come. Around the table patched in from the deck, the old voices tried one last time to find the wall that had held them up for so long. The speaker's voice came thin over the channel, reaching for the words that had comforted an empire through 4 petitions and a battle group and a loss. The Concorde still had not counted the true cost of 1 world. The speaker began, is a leash. He did not finish it. He did not finish it because as he spoke the words, the long answer did the smallest thing, the first thing it had done since arriving, and it was not fire. It was light. A single low pulse ran the length of the great dark hull, slow, deliberate, a thing that a human would have recognized as a ship, simply confirming it was ready. And every sensor in the Concorde fleet screamed at once, and the reading they returned was not a weapon. Signature. The registry could name, because of course it was not. Nothing about the humans was in the records, and the number the sensors reported for the output of that single low pulse was larger than the combined yield of Doran's entire defensive sphere. 1 pulse, 1 ship. Eadling, the speaker, stopped talking. In the great cold chamber, under the turning worlds, no one said the phrase back. The leash at last had nothing on the other end that any of them wanted to imagine, and the silence where the words should have been was the loudest thing the Concorde had heard. In 1,000 years, Doran stood at the rail, with his hundreds of ships blazing hot and useless around him, and understood that he had at last arrived at the true dimensions of the morning. He had not paused over. He opened the channel to the humans himself. His voice, when it came, was not a marshal's voice. It was just a tired man's, at the edge of a very large dark, asking the only question left, what do you want? What do you want? The words hung in the dark, and Nadia Cole let them hang. Not cruelty. She simply wanted him to hear himself ask it, this marshal, who had signed a clearance over a cooling cup, and never once in all the reports that followed asked what he had cleared. You keep asking us questions, Cole said finally. How many ships? What we want? Here's a better one, and I'd like you to sit with it. Do you know what you took? Duran did not answer, because he did not. Halden's Reach, she said. You logged it as agricultural. That's correct. You logged it as 400 souls. Also correct. What your log doesn't say is that one of those 400 was a man named Elias Vance, 61 years old, and that he spent 40 years building a seed vault, and that he wrote every label in that vault by hand because he didn't trust a machine to spell the names right. A pause. You erased that vault to make room for a supply lane, and then you put 400 people in a hold and called it leverage. On the flagship deck, an officer quietly pulled the Halden's Reach file and confirmed in a small, stricken voice that the human's account was accurate to the line. Here's what I want you to understand, Cole went on, and her voice did not rise, and that was the terror of it. We could have opened with the long answer. The morning you took that station, it was already built. It has been built for a very long time. We did not send it then. We sent a patrol, and we asked for our people back, and you answered by sending 6 ships, and then 40, and then you told the galaxy you were coming for our world. Every step of the way you had the chance to give 400 farmers back, and call it a bad morning. You chose each time to do the other thing. She let that settle. So now you know what it is. It's above your fleet. One pulse read higher than everything you brought. You've done the arithmetic by now, I think. You know we can crack that planet under you. You know we can end every ship in your sphere before you finish this sentence. A beat. And I want you to watch very carefully what we do instead. The long answer moved. Every officer in the conquered fleet braced for the end, and the end did not come. What came was worse, in the way that mattered, because it left them alive. To understand it, the great dark ship reached down into the Concorde's defensive sphere, and it did not fire. It reached. A discipline of light moved through the hundreds of conquered hulls, precise, unhurried, touching each ship in turn, and one by one, the Empire's weapons went cold. Not destroyed, silenced. Every gun in Doran's fleet, the largest concentration of force in a generation, went dark and stayed dark, and the drives held, and the life support held, and the crews sat in their suddenly toothless ships alive, breathing, disarmed, and entirely at the mercy of a thing that had chosen deliberately, in front of all of them, not to kill. Then, the long answer withdrew its light and settled back above them and did nothing else. It did not press the advantage. It simply waited, holding an entire empire's fleet, defanged and whole, so that there could be no mistaking what it was. You took the people who grew our food, Cole said into the silence. You put them in a hold. We just took every weapon you have and left your crews their air. Look at what each of us reached for when we finally had the other by the throat. Her voice stayed flat, and it stayed flat all the way through the line that would be repeated in 10,000 rooms across a shaken galaxy before the week was out. You chose to erase the people who grew our food. We chose to send your crews home. Do not ever let anyone tell you those were the same choice. Doran stood at the rail of his dark, disarmed flagship above the tactical well, where his hundreds of silenced ships turned slow and helpless, and something in the old marshal came apart very quietly, the way a bridge fails first, in a single beam that no one hears. He had built a life on a phrase, "One world is a leash." He had believed, without ever testing it, that power was a thing. You counted that a species with one planet had one throat, and that the Empire's safety lay in always being the one holding the collar. And the humans had just shown him the truth, that his registry had no category for. It was not that the humans were stronger, though they were. It was that when the humans finally had the collar in their hand, when they had the whole Concorde fleet cold, and could have closed their fist, they had opened it instead, and told him plainly that this was a choice, and that they had made the other choice available to him at every step. And he had refused it every time. You cannot leash a thing that hands you back your own leash and asks you gently to do better. The crews go home, Doran said. His voice was hoarse. It was not a command. There was no one left to command. It was closer to a man agreeing to terms he had not yet been given, because he had finally understood who was setting them. They will, Cole said. You'll fly them home yourself, and you'll carry a message to your table. And it isn't a threat. So listen to the shape of it. The channel held her calm, and under the calm, for the first time, something that might have been grief. We didn't build the long answer to end you. We built it so we would never have to. It has sat in the dark for longer than your empire has had a name, and we have hoped every single day of that we would die of old age without ever having to show it to anyone. You made us show it. That's the cost. Not your fleet, that we had to open that door at all. The transmission did not close on a boast. It closed on a name. Bring back the 400, Cole said. All of them. And when you read the manifest, read it out loud. Every name, starting with Vance. Above the silenced fleet, the long answer waited patient as deep water. And Vesic Doran began for the first time in his life to read the names of the people he had cleared. The 400 came home in 7 days. Doran flew them himself, as he had said he would, because there was no one left who could have made him, and because he found, to his own surprise, that he wanted to. He took a single unarmed transport out to the human coordinates with the survivors of Halden's Reach aboard, and he did not bring an escort, because an escort would have been a lie about the situation, and the marshal was finished with lies about the situation. He had run out of the strength it took to keep them. The humans met him with the Meridian. One ship, the same ordinary working hull that had started all of it by standing in a doorway and looking. And Duran understood now that this had been deliberate, that they had shown him their smallest ship first and their largest ship last, and let him spend the space between the two learning at his own pace. Exactly how wrong he had been. He docked. He walked the 400 across himself one at a time, and he made himself look at each of them because he had cleared them without looking, and it seemed to him that the least he could do at the end was the thing he had refused to do at the beginning. Then the Concorde came to the table. The real table this time, the high table itself patched through in full 43 species, and the speaker and the slow gold rotation of 10,000 worlds behind them, all of it arranged as it had always been arranged to make ones across from it feel small. It did not work anymore. Doran watched the old staging with something close to shame. You could not make a species feel small by turning worlds above its head when it had just held your entire fleet in its open hand and chosen to give it back. The speaker tried to open the way the Concorde always opened from strength, from height, listing the terms under which the Empire might consider a cessation. Cole let him finish. Then she asked one question, and it ended the pretense for good. How many yards do you think we have? The speaker did not answer. You've been counting our ships since this started, Cole said. 40 you heard first, then 206. Numbers. You kept filing as lies, because they didn't fit your records. So let me give you the real one, and let me tell you exactly what it is. So there's no more filing. She was not gloating. She had never once gloated through any of it, and that was the thing that made the Concorde finally believe her. 844 hulls cleared the North Yard last month. Not our largest yard. One of many, 844, off a single line in 30 days. And the line did not stop when the month ended, and it has not stopped now, and it will not stop while we are talking. Because the people who run it do not need to be told. There's a war on they just built. That is what you have been fighting. Not a fleet. Abi. In the great chamber, no one moved. Duran watched the number land on the table, the way a stone lands in still water, and he watched the rings of it spread across 43 faces, and he saw the exact moment each of them arrived, one after another, at the arithmetic he had arrived at alone in the dark days before. You cannot deter a habit. You cannot bleed a habit. You cannot threaten a species into stopping a thing it does not experience as effort. The Concorde had spent its whole existence measuring power as the size of the fleet you could point at an enemy, and the humans had been quietly measuring it as the speed at which you could replace whatever you lost. And by that measure, the only measure that had ever mattered, the Concorde had been outmatched before it took the first station. The speaker reached one final time for the wall that had held the Empire up. One world he began, and his voice was already failing, already knowing. Is a no, Cole said. Gently. That was the terrible part. She said it gently. Let me finish that one for you because you've said it 4 times to our petitions. And I've read every transcript. One world is a leash. That was your whole philosophy. A species with one planet has one throat, and you keep the collar, and so you're safe. She let it sit. You had it backwards, the entire time. It was never a leash on us. A species with one world to lose learns very early, and very permanently, that it cannot afford to fight the way you fight. It cannot trade losses. It cannot spend a generation and shrug, so it learns to build faster than it can be broken. And it learns to answer once, so that it never has to answer twice, and it learns to remember every single name. Because when you have one world, every name is somebody you know. You looked at our one world and saw a leash. What you were actually looking at was the reason we became the most dangerous thing you will ever meet. A pause, and then the line, flat and quiet, and built to outlive the war. A species that keeps a record of everyone it has lost does not forget how to find you. The chamber was silent. Somewhere in it, Doran understood that sentence was already being written down. So here are the terms, Cole said, and there is only one, and it is not a threat. So hear the shape of it. Recognition. The thing you denied us 4 times. Not because we need your table. We have done perfectly well without it. but because you need to sit across from us and say out loud that we are a people and not a leash. You need to learn to say it, so that the next time one of you looks at a small world with something you want in orbit above it, you remember what a small world can be, and you pause. That's the whole piece. That's all of it. You recognize us, and you never again mistake the size of a species for the size of what it can do. The speaker asked in a voice with nothing left in it whether the humans would guarantee they would not use the long answer again. Cole was quiet for a moment. When she answered, it was the closest she came in all of it to letting them see the weight she carried. We built that ship a very long time ago, she said. After a war you never heard of against something that isn't us. We built it, and we put it in the dark, and we made ourselves a promise that we would spend every year hoping to never take it out. You are the reason we took it out, not your fleet. Your certainty. You were so sure a small thing couldn't hurt you that you made us prove otherwise, and proving it cost us the one thing we most wanted to keep, which was the door staying shut. We are not going to use the long answer again. A pause. We are going to put it back in the dark and go back to hoping, and you are going to make very sure that no one ever gives us a reason to open that door a third time, because we opened it once by choice a long time ago, and once because you forced us, and there will not be a third telling of that story where anyone is left to hope for anything. The high table agreed to the terms. Of course it did. There were no other terms. It agreed to recognition, and to the return already completed, and to a border it would, from that day forward, treat as a thing it did not test, and the 43 species filed out of the great cold chamber, under the 10,000 turning worlds, having learned very late, and at a price, they would to be a generation understanding the single lesson the humans had been trying to teach them since the first petition, which was that they had never once been the largest thing in the room. Doran stayed after the others had gone. He asked through the channel to speak to the Admiral directly alone, and Cole allowed it, and for a moment the Marshal and the humans sat across a distance of 200 light-years, with nothing between them but the truth. I signed the order, Doran said. Halden's Reach. I want you to know it wasn't hatred. That's worse, I think. And I want you to know, the worst thing, it wasn't hatred. It was a Tuesday. I cleared a lane and drank a cup and did not pause my hand, and 400 people stopped being on my map, and I did not think about them again until you made me read their names. He was quiet. I have been reading them every day since. I don't expect that to matter to you. I'm telling you so that you know it matters to me now. It matters, Cole said, not the way you want it to. It won't give the man his 40 years back. But a marshal who learns to pause his hand is worth more to the small worlds than a marshal who never signed the order in the first place, because the first one never had to learn anything. She looked at something off her screen, and her flat calm broke just slightly, just for him because he had earned that much. There's a name on that manifest. You read out, Vance. Elias Vance, the Seed Vault, Doran said. The one who wrote the labels by hand. His daughter's been on this ship the whole time, Cole said. Second engineering. She didn't know. I kept it from her because there was a war to run, and I couldn't afford to break her at her post, and because until the 400 were home, I didn't know which way to break the news. A long pause. They're home now, all 400. Doran understood then what she was telling him, and what she was not, and he understood why her calm had been hardest of all to read on this one point. Through the entire ordeal. Is he among them? Doran asked, very carefully. The father. Cole was quiet for a long time. Read me the manifest, she said. The one I had you read out loud in front of your table. Read it to me again. Slowly. Every name. Her voice was steady, and it cost her everything to keep it steady. I'm going to go find his daughter now. And before I tell her anything, I want to hear all 400 names read by the man who signed the order out loud, in the right order, the way you should have read them. The morning you cleared that lane, start at the top, and Vesic Doran High, marshal of a sovereign concord, that would never again be sovereign in the way it had believed, sat in the dark of an unarmed transport, and began slowly to read 400 names to the one person in the galaxy who most needed to hear whether one of them was still breathing. Vance was in second engineering when they came to get her. She had known something was wrong for a week, the way you know a room has changed. before you can say what moved. The Admiral's face, always flat, had gone flatter. People stopped talking when she came into the mess. Twice she had caught an officer looking at her and looking away too fast, and she had told herself it was the war that everyone looked strange during a war, and she had gone back to her coolant lines because a coolant line does not lie to you and a face sometimes does. When Admiral Cole came down to engineering in person, Vance stood up so fast she cracked her knuckles on the housing. "Come with me," Cole said, nothing in the voice. "There's someone I need you to see, and I'd rather you saw them than heard about them." They walked the length of the ship without speaking. Cole did not tell her on the way, and Vance would understand later that this was a kindness, that there is no good version of the sentence, and the Admiral had chosen to make her carry the not knowing for 200 meters, rather than hand her the wrong shape of hope and have to take it back. They came to the receiving bay, where the 400 from Halden's Reach were being logged and fed and looked over by human doctors. 400 people who had spent 7 days in a conquered hold learning what leverage meant, and Cole stopped at the hatch and stood aside. "Third row," she said. "By the water station." He asked for tea. "We didn't have his kind. He's been complaining about it for an hour." Vance did not hear the last part. She was already across the bay. Elias Vance was 61 years old, and he had a stiff left knee, and he was sitting on a crate by the water station, holding a cup of tea he did not like. And when he saw his daughter coming, he set the cup down very carefully, because his hands had started shaking a week ago and had not stopped, and he stood up on the bad knee, and he did not say anything clever, because there was nothing clever left in him. He just held out his arms. She hit him hard enough to move him back a step. He held on. Neither of them said a word for a long time, and Cole watched from the hatch until she was sure it had landed the way it needed to land. And then she turned and left them to it, because some homecomings are not for admirals to watch. The vault was gone. He told her that later when they could talk, sitting on the crate with the bad tea gone cold between them. 40 years of it. The wheat that grew in thin soil, his grandmother's tomato off earth, in a coat pocket, 4 generations kept alive. And now, not all the jars, all the labels he had written by hand, because he did not trust a machine to spell the names right. All of it cleared to make room for a supply lane by people who had logged it as agricultural and not thought about it again. "They didn't even hate us," he said. He sounded more puzzled than angry. An old man turning a thing over that would not fit in his hand. "The one in charge. When he brought us back, he read our names out. All of us. Took him near an hour. And I watched his face while he did it, and there wasn't any hate in it. There wasn't anything in it at all. Until about halfway through. And then there was too much." He shook his head. "That's the part I can't get past. It wasn't hate. It was a Tuesday. We were a Tuesday to him. He's going to be reading names for a long time," Cole said from the hatch, because she had come back, and neither of them had heard her. "That's the whole piece, Mr. Vance, that he learns to read them slow." Elias looked at the Admiral for a moment, this flat, calm woman who had held an empire in her open hand and given it back. "You saved the 400, he said. "You didn't save the vault." "No," Cole said. "We can't save everything. We learned that a long time ago, and it's why we're the way we are." She almost smiled, and didn't. "But you're a seed man. You know better than anyone. You don't need the whole vault. You need one jar, and a reason to start over." Elias Vance was quiet for a while. Then he reached into the deep pocket of his coat. The coat he had been wearing the morning the lights flickered, and he had told the seedlings it was nothing. And he took out 3 small jars wrapped in a rag that he had grabbed off the 3rd row in the last 4 minutes before the Concorde came, because a man who has spent 40 years afraid of losing a thing has learned to keep the most important part of it in his pocket. He set them on the crate. His hands were shaking. The labels were in his own writing. "I've got the tomato," he said, "and 2 of the wheats, the good ones." He looked at them, and then he looked at his daughter, and then for the first time in 7 days, the old man's face did something other than break. "That's enough to start. That's plenty to start." 200 light years away, and a long time after the story would still be told in 10,000 rooms across a galaxy that had been made to sit and learn the difference between the size of a species and the size of what it could do. They told the part about the long answer coming out of the dark, like a coastline out of fog. They told the part about one pulse reading higher than a whole empire's fleet. They told the Mercyflex, the guns gone cold, and the crews sent home the line about the two choices that were not the same choice. And they told the definition that had ended up carved over the door of more than one war college, on more than one world. A species that keeps a record of everyone it has lost, does not forget how to find you. But the humans, when they told it, did not usually start with the warship. They started with an old man and 3 jars in a coat pocket, because the warship had been in the dark for longer than the conquered had had a name, and it had gone back into the dark, and it was going to stay there. And the humans intended to die of old age one after another, still hoping never to take it out again. The warship was not the point. The warship had never been the point. The point was that a species had looked at its one small world, the one the Concord had called a leash, and had decided that one world was worth answering for all the way once, so that it would never have to answer again. On a new station above a new world, a man named Elias Vance knelt at a fresh row with a stiff left knee, and worked a seed into the soil with his thumb, and told it quietly that it was going to be all right. His daughter was 2 rows over learning where he kept the labels, because he had decided it was time somebody else learned to spell the names right. The tomato had taken off Earth in a coat pocket 5 generations now, and still going. It was an ordinary morning. There were a great many of them after that, and the humans who had earned every one did not waste a single one, wishing it were anything grander than what it was.